We're going to talk about condos and what is going on, because apparently new things are happening again.
The Florida legislature in their new session is talking about condos again. And there are two bills in particular, one moving through the House and one moving through the Senate, that is going to affect the real estate market again as it relates to condos. One of the things that the legislature is aiming to do is allow association boards to make it easier to pass special assessments without the approval of the membership. This new law is also going to make it impossible to get insured if the building is not in compliance with the structural integrity reserve study or the milestone inspection. So they're going to make it very, very difficult for the buildings to actually maintain insurance if they're not in compliance. And the whole point of this is to force buildings to come into compliance to make them safe. Buyers are worried about condos. There's a ton of condos on the market right now because there's tons of special assessments or pending special assessments that are going to be coming down the pipeline. People want to unload. You know what you're doing with condos, and a lot of listing agents don't. I'll have buyer's agents reach out to me and they'll say, I need to get this information, where do I get it? And I say, did you talk to the listing agent? They say, yeah, they don't have it. Okay, did you talk to the association? I don't have their contact information. You need to have a listing agent when you're listing a condo that knows about all of this stuff. And so we talk about this all the time, and you get the documents or try to get the documents and you do your due diligence on what's going on with the building. A lot of realtors don't even know that these things are required.
Hi everyone, welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. Every week we talk about something that will help you make a little money, save a little money, or maybe just help you navigate this crazy world we live in. Well, everybody's been talking about condos, and they want to know what in the name of God is going on with condos. So here with me today, I have Charles Esposito from JK Closings, the marvelous JK Closings, and we're going to talk about condos and what is going on, because apparently new things are happening again.
Once again, yeah. So I feel like we've talked about condos a few times already on this program, and now the Florida legislature in their new session is talking about condos again. And there are two bills in particular, one moving through the House and one moving through the Senate, that is going to affect the real estate market again as it relates to condos.
Okay.
And one of the things that the legislature is aiming to do is allow association boards to make it easier to pass special assessments without the approval of the membership. So last time we talked about this, we were talking about milestone inspection summaries and structural integrity reserve studies. For those of you that don't know, about 3 years or 4 years ago now, there was a building that collapsed in Miami, and it turns out that that building needed to have structural repairs. And the board was fighting with the membership over a $9 million assessment. And then the building ended up collapsing and 100 people died. So now the legislature, they've passed several laws in the last couple of years. They've made structural integrity reserve studies. Required, and the deadline for that passed in December of 2024. For all of the buildings that are not in compliance, meaning they do not have fully funded reserves and they have not done a structural integrity reserve study, the legislature now wants to make it easier for the boards to specially assess their members to bring them in compliance with these structural integrity reserve studies. So a condo usually has to have the approval of their membership to pass a special assessment. If the building is deemed unsafe by one of these studies, now if this law passes, the board is going to be able to pass a special assessment without the approval of the membership.
That makes sense to me, though. I mean, first of all, I was just in a building the other day, and they had these big poles in the corner of her unit holding the building up. And she's like, well, I'm thinking I want to rent it. And I'm like, who the heck's going to want to rent this? You definitely can't do seasonal because nobody's going to want to come on their vacation and deal with all this construction. They told them it was going to be 9 months. They're now on 18 months of work.
Yeah, we're seeing buildings that are actually being condemned. There was one building in Jensen Beach that was deemed unsafe. And one day, everybody that was living in that building was moved out of that building. All of their personal belongings are still there. They're unable to access them because the building is unsafe. And so I guess either that building is going to have special assessments, or perhaps, like a lot of these buildings, the members can't afford to actually fix the building. So then the building's going to be sold. So there's a lot of
So wait, how does that all work? Like if you own your condo, right? Not a co-op, but if you own your condo, number one, like, let's just say like you have your school books in there, you have this in there, you have that in there. Like
if the building's deemed unsafe and everybody's out, you can't go back in until it's safe. So those people, their personal belongings have been sitting in that building for months now.
that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. And there will be a few other buildings like that. We see headlines pop up every so often.
Does insurance cover you for that? Like, you know, like, because now you can't live where you're supposed to. You still have a mortgage payment on it.
So yeah, you do have a mortgage payment that you have to continue paying. It depends on whether or not the building has been mismanaged or not, as to whether or not the insurance will actually cover something like that. And then to the point about insurance, this new law is also going to make it impossible to get insured if the building is not in compliance with the structural integrity reserve study or the milestone inspection. So they're going to make it very, very difficult for the buildings to actually maintain insurance if they're not in compliance. And the whole point of this is to force buildings to come into compliance to make them safe.
Well, that brings another thing, which would be our insurance guy's question, right? So now Citizens is coming up with, you're going to need flood insurance if you're in a flood zone. A lot of these buildings have forfeited having flood, and if they're in a flood zone, they're not able to be in compliance to get insurance. You know, a lot of the lenders won't close on them.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot. Condos that don't have flood insurance, so then the lender, a lender cannot lend on that building. And then also we've seen condos, in order to keep their premiums down, are raising their deductibles, and a lender cannot lend on a building if there's, let's say, a 10% deductible instead of a 5% deductible. So in an effort to mitigate the costs, these buildings are actually making it so that the units are not financeable anymore, and that's just going to continue to happen. It's going to be harder, you know, for buildings that are not in compliance to get insurance.
And that is something. So the other day I posted a property on Facebook saying anybody looking for a first time home buyer, like 3%, 5% down conventional. And I had an agent write, oh, you can't, that's not going to happen. These lenders can't do on it. And I was so happy that a lender had posted and said, no, if they have 5% for the deductible on their insurance, if their reserves are 10%, which I checked all this stuff. So that's a whole nother thing. I created this whole checklist now when I'm going to list a condo. It's been a nightmare to get this stuff.
Yeah, it can be, depending on the building, but then there's also a tremendous opportunity too, especially for unit owners that are in a building that is in compliance and have been maintaining. Now all of a sudden they might have a unit that is financeable, and they're competing against all of these other condos that are not well managed and are going to have a lot of special assessments. So we're seeing the property values of a condo and a unit in the condo that's well maintained actually hold their value, and in some cases increase, because they can assure a buyer that there's not going to be a ton of special assessments, like some of these buildings that have been mismanaged for the last 30 or 40 years in some cases.
Right. Well, I want to go to commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of these items that we need and like what we can do when we can't get them. So stay tuned. We're going to go to commercial break and we'll be right back.
At JK Closing Attorneys, we do all of the same things that a title company does, but with the benefits of being a law office. We can help with residential real estate, short sales, commercial real estate, refinances, 1031 exchanges, and FRIPTA withholding.
Contact JK Closing Attorneys today at 954-332-3111. Again, that is 954-332-3111.
Whether you're buying, selling, refinancing, or building your dream home, you have a lot riding on your loan specialist. Max Fish, a top 1% mortgage loan officer in the nation, will give you a same-day qualifying quote. Max Fish is committed to providing his customers with mortgage services that exceed their expectations, ensuring that you make the right choice for you and your family is his ultimate goal. Contact Max Fish today at 954-729-6933 or max.fisch@nwmcorp.net.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am Laura Sanders. I'm here today talking with Charles Esposito from JK Closings, and we're talking about what's going on in the condo industry. The condo industry has been a little crazy, to say the least. People are scared. I mean, I have some great deals out there, some really nice properties, and it just seems like people are shying away. I was just talking with Charles about how all the documents we need in order to list a condo. We need the frequently asked questions, and the owners ask, why do you need these? So take it away, Charles. Why do we need these?
We need these because statutorily they're required, first of all. So all condo associations under statute 718 have to have certain documents.
I love how he pulls out 718.
This is how often we talk about it.
Listen,
Yeah.
I literally just tell him, we're going to talk about this today, and he just pulls it out.
Anyone that wants to look it up,
Yeah.
718, it's there. These documents are required to be given to a buyer because the buyer has to know what's going on with the association and what the rules are in all of these different buildings. And then now, since January, our condo writer has included more documents now, the structural integrity
my
reserve
God.
study, the milestone inspection, if the building is old enough. So for buildings that are 3 stories and higher, there's more documents that are required. This is all for the benefit of the buyer to do their due diligence. They have to be able to look at the rules. They have to know what's going on with the building. And so to your point, and on several transactions that we've had, it's been very difficult to get this information from associations. Either the board doesn't know what they're doing, or the property management
They don't even know
company
the
is
answers.
slow. Yeah, they don't know some of these answers.
So
you
what
know?
happens if we leave those forms blank? We don't check off any boxes. Like, what's
Yeah.
our liability?
So a buyer can terminate the contract. They can void a contract all the way up to closing if they're using an as-is residential contract with the condo writer that goes along with that contract. There's
That's
different
for no frequently asked questions.
Right,
But what about
so-
leaving boxes unchecked?
For the boxes that you're talking about, the milestone inspection summary and the structural integrity reserve study, it's the exact same thing. If the buyers do not receive these documents, they can void the contract all the way up to the closing date.
Oh, they need the actual inspection?
They do. They are entitled to receive a milestone inspection summary and also a structural integrity reserve study if the buildings are required to have those.
Okay, so 2-story buildings required to have that?
2-story buildings are not required to have that. It needs to
Okay.
be a 3-story building or higher. We're talking about condos and co-ops. And if it is
Even before like 40 years?
If it is in Broward County, it needs to be at 25 years or older. So buildings built in the year 2000 need to have a milestone inspection. Every other county, as of right now, I believe is 30 years still, although I'm sure that some municipalities will change the rules to make them 25 years. And then every building that is 3 stories or higher, condo and co-op, needs to have a structural integrity reserve study, and they were supposed to have had it by December 31st, 2024.
All right, I honestly, people, I'm going back to listen to this show once again when it, after it's aired and you've heard it and I get a recording, I'm listening to this again because I have to tell you, every day it's more and more and more. And I'm talking, I have a whole checklist.
Yep.
And you're barely, some of those things you're even talking about, like, I just thought we had to answer whether or not they had it. Now you're telling me I need copies of this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm almost to the point where I'm saying, should we be listing?
Well, to your
even the
point,
owners can't get it.
there's a lot of
Liability.
buyers are worried about condos, and there's a ton of condos on the market right now because there's tons of special assessments or pending special assessments that are going to be coming down the pipeline. People want to unload. So again, there's a tremendous opportunity for investors that want to come in and buy low, and they're not worried about special assessments. But there's also opportunity for condo owners that want to sell and their building is in compliance. There are a lot of very well-run buildings that are in compliance. They do have fully funded reserves and their property values are maintaining. And, so for a listing agent and a seller that wants to sell a condo that is in compliance, they're able to list at a higher market value than some of these other places that are not in compliance.
I have one right now, though. The maintenance is really low and the financials are great and even their insurance is good. So I'm checking all of that stuff where most agents aren't, and I'm attaching it in Matrix. I mean, I've had some agents say, "Oh my God, I've never seen anybody do all this." I mean, actually, I can't even get any more attachments in Matrix.
It's necessary. So, to you know what you're doing with condos, and a lot of listing agents don't. I'll have buyer's agents reach out to me and they'll say, "I need to get this information. Where do I get it?" And I say, "Did you talk to the listing agent?" They say, "Yeah, they don't have it." Okay, did you talk to the association? I don't have their contact information. You need to have a listing agent when you're listing a condo that knows about all of this stuff, and so we talk about this all the time, and you get the documents or try to get the documents and you do your due diligence on what's going on with the building. A lot of realtors don't even know that these things are required. And so we do get contracts that are not filled in all the way. Boxes are not checked off. And then we reach out to everybody and say, "Hey, is this stuff required?" And sometimes nobody knows. And then we end up having to help with the due diligence on it.
Is there a way that we could pay you guys, where you could have somebody that would get this? Because I feel like it would be helpful to have somebody with a little bit of an Esquire at the end.
So we normally get involved as a last resort. If a seller can't get their condo docs along with their realtor, usually we try reaching out to the property management company, and if there is one, or board members, and we'll write a sternly worded email, and we'll make a few phone calls. I also try to get the association attorney's contact information, and sometimes we're successful in getting that information. Usually if it rises to that level, we can get what we need. Sometimes, though, we'll get attorneys.
They don't even have it.
Sometimes we actually get a response saying the association is not required to provide, this is on a lender questionnaire, not required to answer a lender's questions. Okay, that's true. They're not required to, but then that means that the closing's not going to happen, and it means that the lender's not going to be able to provide a loan on that building.
No, they charge for that, and I get that. That's a condo questionnaire, and I get they charge for that.
They will charge
That's
for
fine.
it as well. Yeah.
But they've tried to tell me, "Oh, we have to charge." I mean, I've had them where they've told my clients, "Hey, we don't have frequently asked questions." I'm like, well,
right.
They better find
them. If they don't have one of these documents, they are actually not in compliance with the statute, and then the buyer can void the contract. 718.
718.
So
okay.
The buyer can void the contract, and then the seller actually might have a legal claim against the association for not having this available. So something like the frequently asked questions and answers.
So as long as they say we don't have it.
Yeah. If they say they don't have it, they're not in compliance with the statute. The seller, the owner, and all of the members could potentially sue the association for that because they're required to have it. And they're required to update that particular document every year, the frequently asked questions and answers document.
Can they fill it in by hand if we give them a blank one, or no?
The association can, yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. There are blank forms that we have for that. And it has to be the association.
No, I get it. Can't be us.
Yeah, it can't be a
I'm not
realtor, and
filling
it
out
can't be an owner.
nothing for anybody. No, I'm not.
Yeah, and those documents have important questions on them, like what are the lease restrictions on there. So some buildings pass rules that you can't lease within 1 year of owning. Well, that might not have been the case a year ago or 2 years ago. And so we've actually dealt with an association before where we had all of the documents. And then when the buyer was interviewed by the property manager and the president, they said, we have a rental restriction of 1 year here. And it was an investor. It was not.
Because they changed.
But we said, wait a minute, we have all of these documents. Me and the two realtors went through 700 pages of association documents and could not find anything talking about a 1 year rental restriction. And on their frequently asked questions and answers document, it said no rental restrictions. And then all of a sudden the property manager produced a document that they passed 10 years ago and never provided it in any of the documents to anyone. And, so that deal.
So what ended up happening?
That deal, the seller offered a credit to the buyer, but the buyer was so turned off by the association that they didn't want to close anymore. And they ended up moving on.
Wow.
Yeah.
But does the seller have any
The seller could have had a claim against the association, but they chose to just relist it with a 1 year rental restriction. They decided it was less expensive to do that.
Oh, so what would something like that cause to litigate? You're not a litigator.
Yeah, I don't.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, we would refer that out. I mean, it would cost potentially thousands of dollars if they actually litigated over it. It wasn't worth it in that scenario. In other cases, if an owner is not getting what they need from an association, it could prevent every single sale from every buyer that they potentially have. So we do have some owners that pursue litigation against associations.
Oh. So what would your recommendation be when you're told, because here's what happens. I'll ask them questions like, because the sellers don't know. They really don't know. I'll ask, can you rent right away? If so, is there an income requirement? Do you allow pets? If so, what size? How many? Is there restrictions on that? So you start asking them all these questions, and they're like, "Oh no, you have to pay for this."
Yeah, the
And they'll tell me-
association absolutely is allowed to charge an owner for documents. That's allowed.
So for me to ask them questions, they can charge.
Yes, they can.
For me to just
as long as it's
send
in their
an email.
rules. Yeah.
As long as it's what?
As long as it's in their rules and they, it says, what it costs to charge for these things. They're documents they're allowed to charge for.
But
They
it's not a
absolutely
document. I'm asking questions.
Those questions are supposed to be on their documents, their rules, their bylaws, their frequently asked questions and answers documents. But a lot of condos are supposed to also have these things available online. Some of them, I believe, have grandfathered, but if they don't have them online, then they're also
in violation.
They're in violation of that rule as well.
Oh, okay. So that's what I need.
I do see a lot of associations that still don't have these things available online, though. It's tough. We have unit owners that don't know what their own rules are. We have association property managers and board members that kind of stonewall everybody on getting answers. It can be very difficult. And not every association is like this, but there are some that are like that.
Right. Well, I've asked clients, and I'm like, "Oh, what's your parking space number?" They're like, "I don't know." So I'll ask the association. They go, "Ask the owner." And I'm just, it's very frustrating. I spend a lot of my time chasing information because nobody knows.
Yeah, and I mean, we always talk about real estate transactions from our perspective too. Obviously we do legal work and we give legal advice, but most of what we do is just getting stuff done. So we work with the other real estate professionals to do whatever we need to do to get stuff done. Making phone calls, chasing people down, that's not necessarily my job, but we have to try to close.
Helping, yeah.
So, we assist in doing a lot of those things, and we're right there with you. It's very difficult sometimes to get the information we need to close. And if we don't have this information, like I said earlier, a buyer can terminate the contract potentially. And then, usually the unit owners do not want to pursue litigation against their association. I mean, these are people that can't even get the rules and sometimes their bylaws and other documents. So for them to make the leap to actually sue their association is probably unlikely to begin with. If they're comfortable being in an association where they don't even know their own rules and can't get access to their own documents, they're probably not in a position of where they're going to, spend money on an attorney to get those things.
Right. So what's a good number for everyone to reach out to you whether they're a realtor or a buyer or seller and they need your services?
954-779-5000. We do real estate closings, and we're available to owners, buyers, and realtors to help them with their transactions.
And you also can refer out to other attorneys if they have questions and you're not a good fit. You have other people that you can refer
Exactly.
them to.
Like we don't handle estate
Probate.
planning. We don't create wills or trusts or things like that. We don't litigate. We don't do evictions. But we have a lot of attorneys in our network that we help guide our clients and put them in the right direction and help them with that as well.
Awesome. And if you're looking for a top agent, definitely give me a call. Laura Sanders, RE/MAX Direct, 954-650-0827, or go to my web, laurasell.com. Before we leave, we have like 2 minutes left. Let's take a hypothetical.
Okay.
Hypothetically, somebody buys a house. They do an addendum for a repair. The repair addendum says replace the water heater. Mm-hmm. They take an 80-gallon and put in a 50-gallon. And now they're saying that it's not comparable, but they did it a month after the closing. How do you see that whole situation?
That is very, very complicated, and it's one of the reasons why you want to have your addendums reviewed, although we don't always come up with the perfect language for every single scenario. I would say in a water heater situation, if they're replacing it with something that's not comparable, then that's not going to generate the right amount of heat for the house. So therefore, they didn't actually replace the water heater.
So funny you should say
comparably.
that. So what I did is I called the home inspector and I called the plumber. Plumber said it should be just fine for that size house. Maybe it's not connected right. Maybe the electric's not right. Okay, so then I call the home inspector and the home inspector says, yeah, that should be fine. It shouldn't make a difference. Because then there was also a statute that said, I guess it's conservation statute from 2015 saying that you could no longer use 80-gallon waters. In fact, the inspector said that it should be creating your water bill to be your electric bill for the water heater to be a little less because you're only heating 50 gallons versus 80 all the time.
That's interesting because, again, you can't always accommodate for every single contingency. So if it's now legally impracticable or impossible to put an 80-gallon tank in, then the sellers couldn't do that.
Right.
So then there's not really any argument to say, oh, you have to replace it with an 80-gallon because you're not allowed to.
But then the inspector's like, but I see 80-gallon new water heaters all the time. And it's on Home Depot. So it's like...
Interesting.
Right, but it wasn't available in stores. So maybe it's available to order because of other states don't have the same conservation law that we have. Maybe it's a Florida thing. I don't know. Listen, I'm just a realtor, but...
That's a very specific hypothetical.
Yes, it's very specific. Oh, yeah, I guess it didn't turn hypothetical anymore, did it? So anyway, if you're thinking about buying or selling, you definitely need representation. I highly recommend that you utilize attorney-run title companies because you never know what's going to happen. I honestly tell you, you never know what's going to happen. I have some great friends that work for title companies, and every time I'm like, you got to stick with the attorney. So if you're thinking about buying or selling, give Laura Sanders or give Charles Esposito at JK Closings a call. And until next week, we'll see you then.